Good morning, viewers. Welcome to Frankly Speaking with Vibhuti Jha. Today is 9/11, and yesterday we all had one of the most beautiful celebrations in the country, and Hindus celebrate Ganesh Chaturthi. So I hope and pray that we all had a great Ganesh Chaturthi, and I would sincerely hope that Ganesh Bhagwan brings greater joy and he proves himself to be the real Vigna Vinashini that he is. So, with that prayer, I would say, let's jump into the current issue. Who doesn't know 9/11? Especially those of us who have been living in America. And after that entire thing happened, we do know that the entire world rallied around America, entire world. And today is a very somber day. It's a day which is very hard to conceive and conceptualize. I do not know where you were and what you were doing, but believe it or not, I was ready to go to the World Trade Center for a meeting for a client who had arrived from London. And I was supposed to have a meeting in the Marriott Hotel in World Trade Center that morning at 9 o'clock. I was ready to take the train from Port Washington to go to Manhattan and then take the subway to World Trade Center. At 7 o'clock, I got a call. This friend of mine, this client of mine told me, Vibhuti, can we meet a little later at 11 o'clock or so? Because my daughter wants me to drop her to the school and she insists that I do it. I said, great, no problem. I'll see you. My day was reserved for you. So 9 o'clock or 11 o'clock doesn't matter. Friends, rest is history. When my wife called out to me to say, Vibhuti, a plane has hit the World Trade Center, I thought it was a tourist helicopter or something like that had happened. But when I came up and saw what it was chilling. For once, I was really numb as to who could have done it. As the history unfolded, as the story unfolded, we know who did it, how it happened, and who were responsible for that. Fast forward, it's 20 years, and it is so depressing to know that Taliban is forming the government today, a country, a group of people whom we chased out 20 years ago are back in power, and we were the ones, we the Americans, we left the ground. Yes, no war must last for 20 years. There is no way I'm justifying the exit from Afghanistan. Sometimes, somewhere, one had to make an exit. But the question is, what was this exit all about? How was it handled? Today, Taliban invited 6 countries, Russia, Turkey, Pakistan, Iran, China, and Qatar. Think about it. Turkey is a NATO ally. Pakistan is America's ally in war on terror. Think about it. There are a lot of ramifications of this entire thing, and we have to pay attention to that. Along with that, a couple of other issues as well. To discuss this entire thing, I have great pleasure in welcoming my friend and a professional, Mr. Rakesh Kaul. Rakeshji, welcome to this show. And those of you who know him, that's great. Those of you who do not know him, he is an author, entrepreneur, a corporate leader, a gold medalist from IIT Delhi, a great thinker, a strategist of India, Central Asia, Kashmir, and there are things that he can share with us. The information is absolutely mind-boggling. So pleasure to have you, Rakesh. So I want you to tell us about this entire thing. Where were you on 9/11? And how did you feel? How did you feel then, and how are you feeling today, particularly from what all has happened?
Vibhuti Ji, first, I want to wish happy Ganesh Chaturthi to all your viewers. In these times, we have to go back to very foundational gatherings to reaffirm our hope that Ganesha gives us. But I have to first start by saying to you, on 9/11, I was in my office. My office was in this magnificent pier, which would jut into the Hudson River. And then I suddenly saw my employees rush. I was the CEO, so I had the privilege of a corner office. They all rushed into my office to look out of the glass windows, and we could see smoke swirling from these World Trade Center buildings. It was the beginning of intense horror and shock. Uh, Americans, innocent Americans, were killed in the thousands. Our Indian neighbors lost their lives. But today, I hang my head in shame. Shame because today we are throwing flowers and bouquets at the killers of humanity. So it puts us in a very somber mood. The strategic import of what has happened, what is going, what died on 9/11, and what is going to be born on 9/11 is going to shape humanity in this coming millennium. I describe Afghanistan as the cockpit of World War III. And the tragedy is that even our smartest minds still don't grasp what they did wrong.
What do you think we did wrong? What went wrong? It is really mind-boggling. It is shocking, particularly because, recently, just yesterday, you had a scenario that Virginia state, is trying to bring about an educational platform in which the 9/11 terrorists, whom we always have called terrorists, that they are not terrorists, they were extremists. And we know that Ilhan Omar is on record saying that someone did it. This is you. I think I totally agree with you that we are seeing the seeds of Third World War, a global catastrophe, taking shape in Afghanistan because we have surrendered to the ideology that drove that entire region, the entire ideology that attacked us in America, that attacks us in India, and that has attacked the whole world. So much so that the climb down by the United States is so horrendous. It is pathetic to hear the words uttered by the current administration that the Taliban were businesslike and professional in dealings with us. What are we going through? What is that all about? I totally recognize that you don't get into a war which is for 20 years, that we could not do anything is something really shocking.
So when we start the discussion on how people have not recognized or deliberately covered what went wrong, it's always instructive to first start with the numbers. I think it is commonly understood that America spent close to $2 trillion in Afghanistan over the last 20 years. What is not understood is that American obligations to the veterans, to the survivors of the Iraq and Afghan war, estimated over the next 30 years, is another $2 trillion. And in that are the benefits that were owed to the 66,000 Afghan army and police that were killed by the Taliban. In that were the benefits and obligations to the family members of 47,000 Afghans that were killed by the Taliban. Nobody has talked about it. So what went wrong? There are 2 points, Vibhuti Ji, that we have to dig into very deeply. One is the subject of cultural illiteracy. And the second, and actually frightening question, is institutional or systemic memory within America's polity. Let's start with the institutional memory. Vibhuti Ji, nobody has commented on the fact that the Taliban playbook was an exact replay of the Ayatollah Khomeini playbook in Iran. Just as Tehran could be compared to a Western city, educated people, women with freedom and equality, so was Kabul. Totally undone by failing to grasp what was the strategy of the zealots in the countryside of Iraq, which they played in the countryside of Afghanistan. And that's frightening. That's frightening. And what is sickening is that they had the best friend in the world that they spurned, sabotaged, and may have stabbed. And that is India. Because if there's one country in the world that actually knows how to create a successful counterinsurgency campaign against a theo-fascist militant ideological force, it is only India. But now I come to cultural illiteracy. Everybody knows that only 6% of Afghanis speak English. So it's natural that the Americans had to hire 18,000 interpreters. And with their families, they are the 100,000 who are most at risk because they were left abandoned in Afghanistan. But it's not language illiteracy. It is cultural illiteracy. They were there 20 years. And not a single one person cared to familiarize themselves with when did the Anglo-Afghan conflict start, of which we are seeing a continuing play. And if you go and look at the first Anglo-Afghan war, you see four things. The Taliban of those times led jihad. There was an official call for jihad. They surrounded the British. The British had to succumb, and they were told four conditions. And Vibhuti, I will let you draw the parallels. I'll just tell you the four conditions. The first thing they said was, we want the ruler. Of course, the ruler was smart and he ran away. The second condition they said was, you have to leave all your weaponry behind. The third thing they said was, you have to leave all the treasury behind. But the fourth thing is most interesting. They said, okay, we'll let the military leave, but as a guarantee of their good behavior, they will have to leave the civilians as hostages. The Americans never understood how important hostage taking was and is in warfare in Asia. So not surprising that the British were masters of it, and they took the leap saying to London after they, broke the Sikh Empire. So their cultural illiteracy fundamentally led them to make a cardinal mistake, which is that in Afghanistan, you have to fight in the way they fight. Maharaja Ranjit Singh understood that, which is why he took control, which is why they were afraid. So let me stop. We'll move on to the next point. But cultural illiteracy, not knowing who your enemy is, not knowing how they fight, not knowing how you should respond, and institutional memory, very, very tragic outcomes.
It is, you have said it so well. I'm taken, I'm remembering when you mentioned to me that how America made the mistake of not understanding, if I may use the word, the ground realities, and allowed its own experience of Iran Khamenei playbook. They allowed it to play here. That takes me back to a very famous author. His name is A.J.P. Taylor, whose book I read, Europe Since 1789, which is post-Napoleon Bonaparte. And he said, it's indeed truly strange that how history was to repeat itself 100 years or 200 years later, 100 years later, that the mistake that Napoleon committed in going into the Russian winters to attack Russia, Germany was to commit the same mistake 100 years later in the Second World War in entering Russia in the Russian winter.
Yes.
That brings me to my pet theory. The smartest of people make dumbest of mistakes.
Yes.
And that's what is important here to bear in mind, that you said that I have been saying this, and I'm very proud to say I have a very strong reaffirmation in my own belief, which I have been sharing with people who matter in America, is that don't tell India how to deal with people, its neighbors, and in interior matters. Because if there is one country in the world which is your true ally, emotionally and every sense of the term, is India. And you are sleeping with the true enemy. Sleeping with the enemy, the title was never more appropriate than in the case of US Pakistan relationship, that even DG, the Director General of ISI, laughed and made fun of America when he said on YouTube, and I'm not making it up, on YouTube, you can see it, when he says, we defeated America without taking their money and without firing a bullet. I'm asking a question. It is a fiasco of a kind, which CIA, while they contorted the WMD, they did not see this coming. So I suspect if America is smart, it will not allow that region to get into the same scenario that has happened, which will hurt America again. It is not a 9/11. People used to say, we will never forget. I think in this somber mood today in America, they will really never forget 9/11 now. Because this is an insult to people who died in war, and people who died in an innocent fashion. The might of America is decimated. And this is what is important. Hey, the sun set on the British Empire. The Nazi Germany died. Civilizations have disappeared. I'm seeing, I'm reminded of, in a very unhappy way, that President Obama had said that I will change America. My dream is to change America fundamentally. It's a pity that his party has indeed changed America fundamentally. Your thoughts?
Uh, Absolutely, you're absolutely right, Vibhuti. And let's talk about the change, the fundamental change that has happened. The first fatal error in critical thinking is this statement that is oft repeated by everybody. So it has sort of gained some degree of acceptability, and it couldn't be more wrong. And that statement is, no war is forever. In my novel, The Last Queen of Kashmir, which was, I think, the first novel where there is articulated the thesis of the long war. I mean, it lays down where was the beginning of this long war? How did it evolve? And which I think for a while I was pleased that at least one American, General Petraeus, was beginning to use that language. Vibhuti, the long war is very simple. It is a war between freedom and subjugation. It is that simple. America is the land of the free. India is the land of the free. In India, we call it being Swatanta. And if you look at America's enemies, and if you look at India's enemies, their bedrock principle is subjugation of the human spirit. Vibhuti, there is no end to that war. We have to, as a free people, fight that war eternally to preserve our liberty. So that was a fatal principle that was articulated to begin.
Right.
Now, what is the fundamental change it has created? The fundamental change it has created is that it has destroyed the security architecture of those nations, those people who believe in individual freedom and liberty. You tell me, what security architecture is there in place today that anybody has any confidence?
Excellent point. Absolutely excellent point. But today, the security, what you call this beautiful word, security architecture, and to put it in another context, the trust is gone. The trust in the very system that protected you is gone. And that is something America will take time to recover from, because I know this country, having worked with American companies in India as well as here, the one thing that mattered most in America was trust, the power of the referral, as you used to say, that if Rakesh Kaul tells me something, I know he's not lying. Today, it's not there. And that I say that in Afghanistan, you have seen all the Afghan wars were the war of military defeat and military succumbing or whatever. This defeat is not a defeat of the American military might. It is the defeat of the American political expediencies. And that in all this entire thing, the American politicians were blind to the fact, the truth on the ground, that they allowed the history to repeat, partnered with wrong people for one consideration or the other, and they did not really work the system through. Having known fully well that they were there to create an army to defeat Russia. Think about it. Today, Russia is one of the 6 countries invited for reinstallation of Taliban government in Afghanistan. How ironical and how bizarre is that? That it looks like it is a combination of payback. Russia paid America back. Did it? I do not know, because there's a lot of Russian conundrum goes on in this country. How much is true, or I do not know that, but I do know that I had the privilege of meeting Stephen Cohen, who is no more, who was one of the Jewish persons who escaped the Holocaust and ran from Russia here. And he was a great champion of Russia and the United States becoming friends. And he was always, angry about one thing. He advised many presidents on Russian relationship. And he said, the Democrats got it all wrong. It was Trump, who he did not vote for, who he did not like. He said Trump was saying the right things all the time. It's difficult to ignore the reality that was there. So this is so critical. You've used the 2 very important things, is the security architecture and the fight between freedom and those who want to subjugate you. Now, this brings me back to the 9/11, soon after 9/11. I won't name which country that person belonged to, but let me say that he was of Islamic faith, who told me that, Vibhuti Ji, there is no Islamic country, none of the 54, 55 Islamic countries have the strength, ability, or capability to fight a conventional war against any non-Islamic country, because we don't even have our own weapons. We won't last 7 days. But what we do know, the guerrilla warfare that we have learned from you guys. The guerrilla warfare is what we will hit you with every democratic principle that you are proud of. We'll hit you with at your basics of all the philosophies that you are very proud of. We'll abuse you, we'll take advantage of that, and you will your lawyers will fight our cases. The blacks, the whites, the Jews, the Americans, the Hindus, you will fight our cases for free. That's what I get the message of not understanding the nuances of Purva Paksh or not understanding the nature of the beast you are dealing with. And I recall very with great joy when I read Lexus and the Olive Tree of Tom Friedman, which I consider to be his best book. The rest of them are travelogues. But in Lexus and the Olive Tree, he gives a very nice little example. The majority of us are driven by fear. Our actions are a response to a fear. So if you are standing behind a bush and the bush rattles, you have your own fear, what is on the other side. But if you peek through the bushes, you go take the step, peek through that, you see 12 rabbits. Now you know there was nothing to fear about. But if it was a bear, then you know climbing on the tree is not an option. But if there was a lion, then climbing on the tree is a very good option. So unless and until we understand the nature of the beast, or in Sanskrit and in our philosophy, we say Purva Paksh, we will never know. And but the statement that you said, that nobody has dealt with counter-insurgency and terrorism better than India, is probably that we understand to some extent. Political experience is apart. So it is very, very unnerving that today in America we see, this is not the country I came to in 91. I do not know when you came to this country, but this is not the country, the United States of today is not the country I came to in 1991. That's what I want to say.
So, Vibhuti Ji, one has to ask ourselves, how could a society like America go so wrong in its thinking? And credit goes to India that even though there was a cabal that had people from the media, human rights organization, academics, others, attacking India incessantly. The fact is that what should cause the deepest agony to any red-blooded American is the 20th anniversary, near 20th anniversary of a different kind. And what I'm talking about is these prisoners in Guantanamo, these hardened criminals. Do you know the legal case against them has not moved one bit?
Right.
Last week, they had a hearing. And when these people were brought into court, reports are, they were laughing. They were grinning. They had the smiles of winners. A society that after 20 years cannot bring those people to justice because it's caught up in the inner contradictions created by thinking that is beyond corrupt. It's self-destructive. And these are the forces that have tried to also attack India incessantly. And thank God that India kept its cool, kept a thick skin, tolerated, but did what needed to be done.
Right.
And this should strengthen India's resolve even further. Because I'm sorry, the immediate downside risk for India has gone up dramatically.
Right.
And India will have to, not as a country, not as a government, not as a military, but as a civil society. As a civil society, India has to recognize, and Indians have to recognize, that the world has changed. This is a long war. They're not stopping there. Pakistan isn't going to stop. The Taliban is not going to stop. And so we are in a very changed world with very different risk profile.
That brings to the subject matter, like every event, everything, as we say it in our work that we do, everything that happens around us has an impact and implication for someone or somebody more, somebody less. How do you consider, considering the fact that India has spent tremendous amount of soft power, building parliament, building stadiums, building dams, and we invested so much money there, not putting boots on the ground, but we took care of many other investments that made the governing possible, perhaps. Will it matter? Because Taliban have not forgotten one thing, and that is that when the Russian invasion took place, India, under the friendship treaty with Russia, did not come to the side of Taliban. Instead, they stayed quiet, part of the non-aligned thing, and they stayed quiet. So Taliban haven't forgotten that. But of course, the issue is very important here. What impact and implication it will have for India, considering the belligerence of China, Pakistan, and the Islamic Sharia part of the life? Because this is another thing which is I would like you to comment upon, is that this is the culture that totally ignores half the population, called women. Women are more on the forefront of running away and fighting their demonstrations than men. It's very, very bizarre that a country, a civilization, or a faith that ignores 50% of the women under their thumb or whatever, how does that survive? What is the impact and implication for India, considering those people, left liberal gangsters, as I call them, who opt to become anti-Hindu, anti-India, which is considered fashionable in India to be hating yourself?
So I'm going to start with the most fundamental to the most strategic. Even though a lot of people are criticizing the government of India, I think the government of India should stay silent right now. Because the reality is, I think we still have 300 Sikhs and Hindus that have not been allowed to leave. They're being held hostage. So we have to wait until we are satisfied that everybody who feels endangered there is able to come out. We have to bite our lip. No heroics, no bold statements until we get them out. Then we have to make a fundamental shift, which is that there is no such thing like Afghanistan and there is no such thing like Pakistan. Going forward, we have to think it's AFPAC. And we have to tell Pakistan very clearly that when you talk about Afghanistan giving you strategic depth, The only way we see it is it's giving you strategic depth for plausible deniability to create mischief. And if we see any Afghans in Kashmir, they're going to be there because they came all the way across Pakistan. And we're going to hold you responsible for any cross-border terrorism. And that message has to be given with utmost seriousness to Pakistan, that they cannot get away by saying, it wasn't us, it was somebody from Afghanistan. No. Now it's our fact. You know, you fed this Frankenstein monster, it's your baby. Having said that, the fact is that Afghanistan needs India more than they think. More than they think. And 20 years ago, when the Taliban ruled Afghanistan, Vibhuti, the entire budget of the central government of Afghanistan was $100,000. Today, the non-military budget of Afghanistan is $5.6 billion. It's not a big sum of money, but Pakistan does not have it. If China gives it, China will give it because it thinks it can make 15 billion out of it. The fact is, India is a very important trading partner for Afghanistan. We buy something like $1.4 billion of dry fruits, raisins, agricultural products. And most importantly, we sell them a lot of sugar. They have a sugar sweet tooth. So, you know, we don't need them. They're a very small player for us in terms of trade. But Afghanistan needs us because every other partner that they have invited to their swearing in ceremony, with the exception of Qatar, is a bigger cutthroat than even the Taliban. And they know it. They actually understand it. We have enormous goodwill in Afghanistan at the level of the common public. We're really seen as very good human beings. We're untainted, unlike the Chinese, unlike the Pakistanis, unlike the Russians. We are actually seen as a very good people. We have enormous goodwill. That's not going to go away.
But does that matter? Does that matter?
That may not matter in the short term, but as time goes by, it will matter. Because times are going to be tough in Afghanistan. And it will matter. Ultimately, no despotic regime can go against its people for very long. And India is a noble civilization. But as they say, India will have to, there was a very celebrated debate actually that happened day before yesterday. We've got a lot of press, but actually two Kashmiri pundits, prominent Kashmiri pundits, went head on head against each other. You had Vivek Kajju, a very eminent ambassador, retired, of course, who recommended engaging with the Taliban. And then I respect him a lot. And then you had Vice Chancellor Amitabh Mattu, who, dear friend, who said absolutely not. And I'm sort of in a different camp. I'm in the camp that India will have to have a carrot and stick policy with Afghanistan to get the behavior we want out. And India has to communicate what its carrots are that the Taliban will need from us and what its sticks will be. And one of the sticks that the Taliban have to worry about mightily, that has already drawn a line in the sand, is Iran. 20% of Afghanistan is the Hazara people who are Shiites. That has been a traditional fault line between the Sunnis and the Shiites. Iran is very concerned that they have 3.5 million Afghan refugees. They have gone on the record and said any governance has to be democratic, which of course the Taliban will lose if there's a proper election. And if India and Iran align, that's going to be a big problem. And the Taliban know that. They know that. Conversely, if India and Iran align and we build the port and we build the rail line into Afghanistan, that's wonderful for Afghanistan. So we've got options, and we can talk about that more in greater detail.
Definitely. I wanted to, I did dig up some research on the Afghan thing, and I came across a very interesting article written by an Indian. And I'm reading only the last paragraph of that, which is what has happened today. This article was written in 2017. And this man says, talking about the English and varieties of things, since then, as both the British and Russians have learned that while it is possible to conquer territory in Afghanistan temporarily and defeat Afghans militarily in open battle, it is virtually impossible to hold the region down for long when it is filled with guerrillas, tribes, and castles that can constantly weigh down a foreign power. The people of Afghanistan have nowhere to go and can fight their whole lives. Foreigners beware, in particular of the Kandahar region, a luxury that outsiders do not have. The United States should learn from the history of Afghanistan and understand that escalating the war will have no particular impact on the outcome. Minus a permanent occupation, which would be ineffective at best and bloody and cost prohibitive at worst, the only way to deal with Afghanistan is to deal with its plethora of local powers. And if this means accepting the Taliban in exchange for a modicum of stability and a promise not to host global terrorist organization, then so be it. The alternative is an unwinnable, never-ending war. This was written in 2017.
And with all due respect, Vibhuti Jha, at the risk of perhaps starting a debate, I completely disagree with the conclusion.
Okay.
First, I've already told you this nonsense construct, the risk of a long war.
Right.
I have said to you, that is a very faulty construct. There is a long war. Our failure to accept that the world is split between those who fight for individual liberty and freedom and those who seek to subjugate.
Right.
That war is not going away. And that's a war worth fighting. So I want to be very clear about that.
Very good. Now I
The
wanted to come back.
second point, and
Yeah.
then we'll debate.
Hmm.
I am truly appalled that this writer is an Indian and has completely ignored the data point of who was able to rule Afghanistan.
Right.
And that was India. Not once, not twice, 3 times.
Correct.
We had the Shahi kings, Kashmir. We had the Mughal emperors. And then we had Ranjit Singh. So the Indians have shown that you can rule Afghanistan because the Indians understand that world and what it takes.
Right. Right.
So let me tell you one simple, slightly gory example, but reflecting a simple fact. Afghanistan is a very brutal place. There are legitimate reasons as to how a beautiful land, center of Buddhism, Gandhara, the center of creativity, the land which, when Babur came, he writes in Babarnama, had the best white and red wines. And these wines were created by Armenian immigrants. There are reasons why this beautiful land and people were completely converted, traumatized, brutalized. So now they're very brutal. But I'll give you one simple example. You know, people often ask the question, what can you do to a terrorist who's already prepared to die? Vibhuti, has anybody been able to answer that question? What can you do to a terrorist that is already prepared to die? You know what they used to do in Afghanistan to those Ghazis? If they caught you, they would mutilate you so that the rest of your life, you would lead that life as an amputee. You were a living example to anybody else who might have thoughts that they could terrorize society. I'm just giving you that very gory example that I'm not recommending be repeated, but that sometimes when you're dealing with the ideology that is cruel, with the ideology that doesn't respect life, the unthinkable has to be made thinkable.
Thank you. Thank you. Very well. Very well said. And I see the emotion and pragmatism that you are delivering. The message in this entire thing is important to bear in mind. This is a day also, which is very important, is Audrey Truschke, the assistant professor from Rutgers University, is doing a 3-day seminar of dismantling global Hindutva, which she says is important for people to understand the threat and power of Hindus that the rest of the world needs to worry about. And it is very cruel. And that's something needs a treatment because she's talking about dismantling Hindutva and Hinduism without understanding the meaning of the word twa, which is tattva se banta hai. She's accusing Hindutva as the real global threat on a day where Taliban has destroyed the American pride and its own cultural milieu and the infrastructure of security that you talked about. Today, she's doing that. I was part of one such conversation where I tweeted that the 40 universities who have consented to be co-sponsors and supporters of this one, several of them pulled back that they had not given the consent. But some of them wrote very strongly that they want to support academic freedom. And I said in my tweet, Rakesh, that let's also organize a seminar, a global conference, a 3-day event, and seek these very 40 universities to co-sponsor that. Dismantling global Islamic terrorism. Will they support us? That's the issue that is important. And what is important here is that Hindu unity has come about, I've never seen before. So everything that happens is, everything we consider negative at one time has a positive connotation. Every disaster is an opportunity. We Hindus are notorious for never being united. But this has brought about unity in Hindus, and there are a lot of forums happening on this. There is a 3-day conference of protecting Hinduism around the world, and also a seminar on dismantling global Islamic terrorism. How do we see this play out? One little professor, assistant professor, a champion of Aurangzeb, which you and I know was the ultimate terrorist, even worse than Taliban. So there is a very interesting mix to understand here. Is the culture, is it Sharia? Is it Islam? They believe in subjugation. We believe in freedom. So are we seeing reigniting of the clash of civilizations at this point in time?
So, there's an old saying, those whom the gods would destroy, they first drive them mad. And we are seeing in American academia madness. On a day like 9/11, doesn't matter what you are doing, doesn't matter what your area of research is. You have to do a hard pivot and say, on this day, on this sacred weekend, to the degree I have any intellectual power, that intellectual power should be dedicated to the lives that were lost and to helping humanity face the greatest threat that not only took the lives, but is now going to be reborn on this day. So sad. It's no wonder that these so-called scholars on Hinduism or on India, they have become the laughing stock amongst European scholars. The Anglo scholars of UK and America, they're treated with disdain by European scholars. So when you see great European scholars who have deep understanding of Indian civilization, historians like Professor Walter Slage, cultural scholars like Rafael Torella, new scholars like Isabel Rati, and I can go on. These are great scholars who are quietly discovering and rediscovering the wonder that is India. And there are hundreds of scholars like that. They are spreading. They are in Japan. They are in other countries. And they're doing serious work. These people that you have mentioned, they're a disgrace.
They're a disgrace.
And so now the question becomes, what to do with them? What to do with them? And I think they do deserve a response. They do deserve a response. And it has to be predicated again on a rethinking on the Indian side. See, the Hindu mind is a civilized mind. The Hindu mind's response is to reach out to these people and say to them, come, let's debate about this. But the Hindu mind doesn't understand that the Purva Paksh is not driven by reason. They are driven by visceral beliefs and hates. The visceral beliefs may be shaped by some medieval religious impulse that blinds them,
Right.
or it may be driven by nihilistic ideology.
Right.
My friend, you're in a fight with these people. And in a fight, you have to marshal your resources. You have to get organized. There are 210,000 Indian students who come and study in American universities. I think in the last 3-4 months, America issued 55,000 new visas that students from India took to come here. As you know, Vibhuti, we are builders. So these students are like you and me, younger version, studied hard, want to create a beautiful world. They come to America very naive. They are tech students, other areas. And as part of their education, they probably are required to take a liberal arts course, and many of them go into a South Asia course, not realizing the pirhanas that'll await them and that'll pollute their minds. And so the first thing we have to do is we have to figure out a way to reach out to this community of 200.
I want to do a full-fledged program on that. Our time is up.
Okay.
So thank you so much for that. The
Thank
last word to the audience. Thank you for being with us. Happy Ganesh Chaturthi. And taking the cue from what Rakesh ji's brilliant dissertation was and conversation with us was, I invoke two things. My favorite phrase, knowing what we know now, what must we do going forward? Looking backward, going forward. That's an exercise that you need to do. All of us need to do. And invoke Swami Vivekananda's call. Arise, awaken, and assert. Vibhuti Jha has added his own fourth A to that. After you have arisen, awakened, and asserted, act. Knowledge by itself is not enough if can't be applied or is not applied. So as you wake up tomorrow, have a great weekend, think what we talked about today, that we have the ability, we have the strength, we have the knowledge, but we have to become pragmatic, realistic, whether you are a vegan, vegetarian, or ahimsa ke param pujari. If your family is attacked, you have to be in the state of readiness to protect and defend them. If you are not, then you suffer. History is full of examples of that. And this, I want to say to you, that as Rakesh ji said, you got to respond, not react. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you, Rakesh ji, for your wonderful presence. You are a great friend and a wonderful analyst, thinker, and you articulate it well. So great to have you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vibhuti ji. And from my side, beyond those wonderful words you said, I will only add one thing, which applies to every human being and to great nations, especially America.